Hi, everybody. RJ, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, starting a car company sounds, an auto company, I should say, it sounds really, really hard. If you polled this audience and said, what car did you use to drive here? Or what car do you have in your garage? What car did you park in the street in Washington, D.C.? I'll bet you'd get 10 different, maybe even 15 different automakers just from that poll. Yeah. This is a crowded market. Of all the things you could possibly do with your life, why did you start an auto company?
That's a good question. I grew up a huge car enthusiast, and from a young age I could spot any car, know what engine it had, I know the specs on it. Then I started to work on cars, and then I really started to fall in love with the outdoors and enjoy being outside. And as that was happening, I realized these two passions in my life were in conflict. The automobile represented so much around freedom and the feeling of it, the experience of it, and it was at the root of so many of our challenges as society. I'd say the biggest of which is climate. And so when I was a teenager, I said, I'm going to start a car company. I said, I want to work on this problem. I had no idea what that actually meant in any way, how much capital it would require, the scale of what it would mean in terms of a team. But I ended up going to school for engineering, and the day after I finished school, I started Rivian. And the interesting thing about a car company that makes it so complex, in addition to, as you said, the number of competitors are in the space, is it takes a lot of things. So you need, if you're being intellectually honest, it takes many billions of dollars of capital. It takes a team of thousands of engineers. It requires you to have a brand that people know about and care about. It requires a product that has features that are unique and compelling and differentiated. It needs to be robust. It needs lots of testing. You need a plant that takes many billions of dollars and is, the size of a small town. It's 4,000 or 5,000 people work inside of it. It's many million square feet. And you need a supply chain that consists of hundreds of companies that are willing to invest in and be part of your business in terms of providing you parts. And if you had all of those things on day one, it would still take you 4 or 5 years to launch the first product. And in fact, you have none of those things. And to develop technology, you need capital, and to get capital, you need technology. So you have all these interlinked, challenging order operation questions. And unfortunately, I didn't start the company with any money. So capital was a real big challenge. Day one of the company was just me with nothing. And so it took a while to build some of those pieces up, but we took a really deeply philosophical approach, and certainly how I managed my own psyche in this was the core reason behind this was to help drive the change we need to see in transportation, and certainly in a massive shift in how we consume fossil fuel on this planet. And I said, boy, I don't know if this is going to be successful, but if I can have a positive influence on helping to drive large manufacturers to rethink their strategies to go faster, I'll consider that a success. And we had a few pivots early on, but that was really the central question we were trying to answer, is how we can drive as much impact as possible. And hopefully in the end this results in a company that works, but at a minimum, I hope I can drive change.
Before we get to the really interesting stuff and figure out how this company can really make a difference in the world, I just want to make sure that we level set here, because I've seen Rivians on the street, dozens, hundreds of Rivians on the street, but there might be people here who either haven't or who have seen a Rivian but didn't know it was a Rivian. So elevator pitch, 15 seconds. What does your company do?
Thank you for asking.
Let's keep it short, though. The elevators only go into the fifth floor.
15 seconds. So Rivian builds a set of consumer products. We launched a flagship set of products with what we call our R1T, R1S. It's a truck and an SUV, extremely high performance, really fun to drive, but really embraces enabling people to go do lots of things, the things you want to take pictures of. So it's a vehicle built for life's adventures. We have a whole set of products that are coming that are much lower price that sort of sit below that flagship set of products. And then in parallel to that, we leverage the core technology stack that we built in-house and vertically integrated to also launch a commercial side of the business. And we build commercial vans. And our lead customer for that is Amazon. So Amazon has a 100,000 vehicle order to essentially electrify the entirety of their distribution fleet. And that's a massive, and that's a massive move in terms of carbon emissions because of the way commercial vehicles are used. So today we have well over 100,000 vehicles on the road. Well over 20,000 of those are commercial vans, the remainder being consumer vehicles, which you see around. They're unique. They have a unique front-end graphic on them. But the reaction to the products has been amazing. So for the last 2 years in a row, both Consumer Reports, J.D. Power have listed as the #1 brand in terms of desirability, above brands that I grew up loving, Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen. You see some of these great brands that are out there, and our brand's being rated higher than them, which is really exciting.
Great. I think we hit the 10th floor on that elevator pitch, but that's totally fine. We still got plenty of time. So earlier this year, there was a really interesting debate, I think, in the news media about the popularity of electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And I would summarize the debate this way. On the one hand, you had people that were looking at the rate, that is the growth rate of electric vehicle purchases that was clearly coming down, right? A bit like inflation. It was still positive, but the growth rate was coming down a bit. At the same time, Q2 saw the highest number of electric vehicles sold in the US ever. And so I'm wondering, because there really is a very, very frothy discussion out there about whether or not consumers actually want electric vehicles. How do you look at this Rorschach picture?
There's a lot of different ways to look at this. I think first and foremost, so when I started Rivian in 2009, and you can imagine the types of discussions I'd find myself in with suppliers, with investors, when I said I want to start an electric car company. Similar to your first question, why? Quickly followed by, you want to make electric SUVs? I would get asked silly questions like, can they handle the bumps? Can they go off-road? Can they get wet? And so there's such a really low level of understanding of what the technology could enable. And it was in part why we made the vehicle so high performance to really make a statement. But the other thing that I saw was customers weren't yet really even thinking about electrification. Certainly Tesla has done an amazing job at helping to shift that, not only in the United States but across the world. But we hope, we're driving towards helping to shift that, but we really are seeing a change. And today, even customers that aren't fans of electric vehicles or aren't going to buy an electric vehicle for their next product recognize that their next or maybe their next product purchase will be electric. And so all that being said, when we look at the demand for electric vehicles, there was very significant growth in demand in 2023. 2024, we still see growth in demand. So the number of electric vehicles being sold this year is larger than last year. It's just not as fast as what people had anticipated. And we could spend the rest of this discussion talking about the causality of that, but I would oversimplify it to say, I do believe there's an extreme lack of choice in the market. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to buy a car today and you're open to buying any propulsion technology, you have hatchbacks and sedans and minivans and SUVs of various sizes, sports cars, convertibles. If you're going to go buy an electric car and you want to spend less than $50,000, I'd say there's like one really compelling choice with a very specific form factor and a specific brand, which I'm referring to Tesla here. There's not a lot of great other options, and it's precisely why I think it's so important that Rivian exists. I think other companies need to build products that are compelling, and so unfortunately, I would say we just haven't seen that. And while our next product, our R2, we hope helps solve this, but we need lots of others to come into the space. And I think so often we get, as a society, and even in these types of discussions with media covering this, we try to pit different efforts against one another and say this one's going to win, everything else has to lose. This is such a big space. There's 1.5 billion cars on the planet. We as a planet consume about 90 million new cars a year. This, by definition, needs many successful companies building many different flavors of what a car might be that give customers lots of choices that make customers run towards these new options. Now, saying all that, our R1S is it's the best-selling premium vehicle in California. I didn't say best-selling EV premium vehicle in California. I said best-selling premium vehicle in California. So for vehicles priced over $70,000, the first choice is an electric vehicle, and it happens to be a Rivian, which is awesome. So the point is, if you make a highly compelling product, it will draw customers in.
So when I think about decarbonization, and I think about what we have to do, and the kind of machines that we have to build, my model is that we need to build machines that are electric, that get their power from clean energy sources, that are affordable, and that are high quality.
Yeah.
And so people actually choose them,
Yeah.
right? So I guess ECAQ, electric, clean, affordable, quality. I want to go through the EACQ, right? Yeah, maybe not, yeah, ECAC. I want to go through this a little bit because I think each of these are really, really important. Your car is electric.
Yep.
But if you live in Wyoming, or if you live in North Dakota, or if you live in Montana, or if you live in Missouri, where 50% of the electricity comes from coal, that means you've bought an electric car, all right, pretty good. You're not burning gas when you drive down the road. But when you plug that car into the wall, 50% of the electrons that are coming into your car are coming from coal. And so to a certain extent, you are making progress, but you're not solving the supply side of the energy crisis. Are you thinking as deeply about the products that you build as you are thinking about working to clean up the way that we generate energy in this country, and specifically the way we generate electricity in this country?
Yeah. I love that, because it's such a, I think it's such a point of confusion around electrification. So first and foremost, electric vehicles very efficient at taking energy from the battery and converting it to mechanical power with the motor. So that transfer power from the battery to the wheels is, depending on the vehicle, usually between 90 and sort of 94, 95%. And so the fact that the vehicle itself is so efficient allows it to be something that can leverage power from a grid that has a lot of coal on it, or a grid that's heavy with natural gas, or even a grid that is much cleaner and runs off, let's say, wind or solar. But regardless of the composition of the grid, even our dirtiest grid in the United States, an electric vehicle is still much lower carbon emissions because the power plants are running at much larger scale and can be optimized around efficiency. Whereas the engine in a car is a micro power plant, and it's running highly inefficiently relative to, let's say, a coal-powered steam power plant. Now, saying that, putting that aside, I think it's really important that we recognize as a society where we are in time. And I actually think, by the way, we're all so lucky. Like, I can't believe I'm alive at this moment in time. And you can imagine 2,000 years from now, the history books are going to look back and see this moment. And there's so many amazing things about this moment, the biggest of which is that we built this incredible industrialized society on our planet over the last, call it 125 years. But we built it, of course, through accessing fossil fuels. And those fossil fuels allowed us to very rapidly build out the industries that we know, build out the infrastructure that we live with. But that represents, and must by definition represent, a blip in time. This will be known as the fossil fuel era. There is a finite supply of fossil fuels on the planet, and we today have a choice as a planet to continue burning all of those fossil fuels till there's none left, which would give us a few more generations worth of energy. We can debate whether it's 3 generations or 4 generations, but it's in the grand scale of time, it's really small. It's de minimis. But in the process, we're taking hundreds of millions of years of accumulated carbon that accumulated through plants and, to a lesser degree, animals on the planet, surface of the Earth, living, dying, and being buried in the crust of the Earth, and we're recarbonizing our atmosphere. And that, of course, is creating a very significant risk for life on our planet. It's creating a shift in our climate patterns. It's raising the temperature of the Earth. And it's also leading to more extreme weather patterns, which have all sorts of implications, particularly if people live around the equator on the planet. So I think it is imperative that for the generations that are on this planet a few hundred years from now, that we, as a society today, make the move off of fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to have to do it anyways. Build the amazing new businesses that are going to create a truly sustainable economy. Build the businesses that run renewably and without the use of fossil fuels. But the scale of what we've created over the last 125 years isn't something that we can press a green button and say instantly it's carbon free. We have, there's over 2,000 coal power plants on the planet. There's over 2,000 natural gas power plants on the planet. As I said, there's 1.5 billion vehicles on the planet that have engines in them. So the time scales to change out our entire vehicle fleet are going to be measured in decades. I often say, the course of my life, we'll see that fleet go from almost all entirely combustion powered to entirely electrically powered. And the same time scale, similar time scale exists for a grid, which is there's many, many, many billions of dollars of capital invested into an infrastructure that has to change. Of course, we want to see that change as quickly as possible. Policymakers are hopefully going to help drive towards that. But in a similar time scale, over the next several decades, we're going to see those thousands of fossil fuel powered plants be replaced with carbon-free energy. And again, we have to accept that we can't press a button and have either of those things solved immediately. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time on both sides. And a piece that's missed with electric vehicles that's exciting is they represent actually part of the solution for our grid. So for our grid to move to a higher degree of renewable energy, much higher degree of renewable energy, it needs, think of it as like big energy shock absorbers. And so you can think of that like as a metaphor for it, but what we really need is ways to store energy. So we need lots of batteries, and our vehicle fleet represents a really interesting opportunity to serve both as storage for the grid to have a bit of both high and low frequency demand modulation. But interesting, you can also control when the supply or when the demand side is used. So you can coordinate when the vehicles are charged with when the energy on the grid is the lowest carbon intensity. And there's lots of analyses on this. You can look at research papers across academia on this, but simply controlling usage of energy, timing of usage of energy for an electric vehicle can result in somewhere between 15 and 20% reduced carbon emissions. No CapEx, just more intelligent timing of charging. And so these are topics I spend a lot of time on. We've directly made investments into building out new renewable energy projects. We have the largest coal to solar project in Kentucky. We have a number of wind projects that we're the financial sponsor of. But we're also spend a lot of time with utilities thinking about how we can think of it almost like a NASDAQ for energy, which is we need better, more precise signals from utilities to say when we should or shouldn't be charging our vehicles. We do this very crudely in places like California with peak pricing. Peak pricing is effectively a capitalistic way to say, please don't use energy right now. We're charging you more for it. But we need to be much more sophisticated to have a direct line on, hey, we want to charge our vehicle between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Right. What happens today, unfortunately, is we all go home, we all plug in our cars. It's usually between 5 and 6:30 p.m. And there's zero coordination. But that's, again, this is because we're like in really early days. As we imagine the world of 15 years from now, we won't be doing it like that. It'll be much more sophisticated.
Again, I want to go back to electric, clean, affordable quality, because that's really the four-parter that we need in order to solve this problem. We've talked about electric, we've talked about clean. You make a high-quality car that people say that they love. We had to talk about affordability. Yeah. I feel like affordability is not only an existential crisis for your company, an existential challenge for your company. It's an existential problem for decarbonization, right? Yeah. It's not just Americans with an average household income of like 70,000 that need to contribute to the solution here. Yeah. It's Africa, it's Asia, it's South America, where the per household income is something closer to 5,000, 3,000. We have to build products that people can afford to move around the world and live flourishing lives that don't require us to burn the plants of the Jurassic era in order to live. So let's talk about affordability. Right now, your first model has a starting price of about $70,000. Yep. You want to bring that down to $45,000 for the models that you're releasing in the next few years. Yep. How do you do that? How does a company like yours scale enough that you can bring down the cost of your product by 50% in just a few years? Yeah. Well,
This is the fact that we started with a flagship product that has a high price point. It shouldn't at all be a surprise. It typically, in any business and almost any industry, particularly businesses that have physical products, you start with higher priced products, the premium version of your product, because it allows you to pay for some of the technology that's embedded that hasn't yet had cost optimizations play out. And so we did that. Our next product, which we call R2, will have a starting price of $45,000, and we have a sibling product, which we call creatively R3, which has a price that's even lower than that. And they represent significant learnings we've had as a business in terms of how to manufacture the vehicles, but also interactions and relationships that we're building with our supply chain to simplify the designs and to optimized purely around cost, and frankly to take some of the features down and adjust them for that price point. With the flagship product, we have a lot of content in our first set of vehicles. The other thing I'd keep in mind, I'm so glad you mentioned this, the United States is very unique in the number of cars that we have per person. And we sort of somehow, I think, forget the fact that this is very specific to our country, where there's 700 to 800 cars per 1,000 people. Most countries are, even in developed markets like, let's say, Europe, it's half that. And in markets that are still developing, let's say sub-Saharan Africa, it's a teeny fraction of that. It's a handful of cars per 1,000 people. And so that represents an important opportunity we have, which is, as those countries continue to grow and expand their economies, the wrong answer is for them to start to take all of yesterday's technology, all of the combustion-powered plants that are making cars for the United States and Europe, and just ship that technology there because it's cheap, it's depreciated. The right answer is to say, let's develop the right form factors and vehicle types for those markets and allow them to just skip this whole combustion ecosystem that we've created here. Now, that's easier said than done, no doubt. And it's something that I think represents an almost a necessary step. We have to avoid making that mistake in these markets that are expanding and growing. And fortunately, a lot of the governments believe that as well. And to your first question, I really deeply believe the simplification of vehicles of all types, four-wheeled vehicles, two-wheeled vehicles, that comes with electrification will ultimately result in lower cost structure. We're just working through the technology curve. If I grew up restoring cars, I grew up working on engines. If you take an engine apart and you take an electric motor apart, it's very clear how much easier it is to build an electric vehicle. The challenge is the material cost and the battery technology is still quite expensive. But outside of that, the rest of the car is a lot simpler. And so I do believe we're going to see the cost curve get to a point where the most economic decision you can take is to be in an electric vehicle. And that's of course what we work towards as a company, and we hope many others are working towards.
There are a lot of technological revolutions that are happening at the same time right now. Solar, electric vehicles, also artificial intelligence.
Yep.
And generative AI right now, as Nick was just explaining a few minutes ago, is moving so quickly that I wonder how difficult it is for some people to plan for the future, for some companies to plan for the future, when there's a technology having a vertical hour where it's increasing by leaps and bounds in terms of capability every 9-18 months. When you look at the progress that we're seeing in generative AI, which has been so successful in, let's say, mapping language, and we've not seen necessarily similarly broad success in artificial intelligence mapping the physical world, right? There is no equivalently popular ChatGPT for autonomy, for vehicles that can drive themselves, notwithstanding Waymo's success and what Tesla's working on. How do you, as the leader of an auto manufacturer, think about building a car company for the next decade, for the next 2 decades, when you're in the middle of this revolution over here in artificial intelligence that might be more important to your business in 5 to 10 years than like anything that we've talked about, right? Like that revolution might completely swallow the auto industry. How are you beginning to think about folding in the progress of generative AI into your business and your vehicles?
First, I couldn't agree with you more. I've certainly in my life, and I think I would say this is probably true for most people, I've not seen a technology advance as quickly as what we're seeing with AI and with generative AI, and what it means in terms of remapping the way we run our businesses, the way we design our businesses, and importantly for us, the way we design our products. So there's not a company in the world that, unless they're planning to disappear, that isn't thinking about how they redesign their business around generative AI. And I spent some time over the last few days with a group of CEOs I get together with, and we talk about these topics, and we're in different businesses in different fields. And it's remarkable to see how significant we can change our businesses to make them better for customers, to make them, to the previous discussion, to drive cost out of the business, but also to elevate what our team members can do and to focus our team members on things that are higher value add for customers, for the products, certainly for the business. So saying that, I'll sort of not jump into the details of how we see it playing out in terms of how we operate our business. I think importantly, how it affects our products is an interesting question. And we look at what happened with ChatGPT and how that very quickly took the idea of what transformers are and all these topics that up until a few years ago, no one in this room would have been following that closely, or some people maybe not, but most folks in this room probably weren't following that closely, to now everyone in the room understands, at least at a high level, what an inference chip is, what a training platform is, what a transformer is, and these are becoming parts of our society, certainly parts of our business community. But we've done it through words. So we can write essays for a high school report, we can write emails, we can respond to customers, we can do things with words, and we've seen that build out with a handful of frontier models, and I think there's going to be more than 5, less than 8 big frontier models for the LLM space. But we haven't seen that build out in the physical world. So we don't have true frontier models for the physical world. And as you call out, Waymo, Tesla, certainly I'd say are examples of companies that are at the leading edge of doing this. But to build out those types of models, it is a multi-billion-dollar exercise. It's going to take a lot of time. But importantly, the set of ingredients you need to control and own a perception stack, so a set of cameras and maybe a few other sensors, but these will be primarily vision-based systems. You need a very strong in-vehicle inference chip to take actions from what we see with the cameras. And you need to be able to control that flow of data from end to end, so from the camera all the way through the actuation of the controls. And what's so amazing to me, it just blows my mind, is how everything around self-driving has changed in the last 2 to 3 years because of the strength of end-to-end training and end-to-end techniques. And we no longer sort of look at, let's say, a wall and say, or look at you and say, you're an object, you're a human, here's your vector in X, Y, and Z, and then feed that into a control system that has to make decisions around, you're the human, this is the plant, that's a human over there. We now can look at it in a more holistic end-to-end fashion and train much more in the way the human mind would look at this situation. And it allows us to go much faster on feature development, but it requires a lot of GPUs, or equivalent, it requires a lot of training. And so I don't think there's going to be 20 foundation or frontier models for the physical world. I think there's going to be more than 5, less than 10. And so a big question, which hasn't been answered, and certainly I'm not going to attempt to answer it here, is who's going to build those frontier models? We're working towards one, but it's going to take a lot of capital, it's going to take a lot of time. Tesla's, of course, working towards one, Waymo's working towards one. But it'll be interesting to see the types of relationships and partnerships that form within very specific vertical domains to enable companies to share these platforms. And I do think in the automotive space, given the pace of new technology growth, we are likely to see more creative partnerships around technology. We're a case in point on that. We did a $5 billion deal that was announced with Volkswagen, where we're providing them our software platform, not for self-driving, but for broader software within the vehicle, and our compute stack. We design our own computers. Our computers that go into the vehicle we're leveraging, which is amazing. So we're able to take this awesome technology stack we built. We're allowing a big company, Volkswagen Group, which has a host of brands underneath it, to leverage that to advance how quickly they can build highly compelling products. But I think we're going to see more of those types of deals going forward. And I think it's going to be really important for us to very rapidly answer one of my first points, which is we need a lot more products that are super compelling and interesting to get to a world where 100% of new car sales are electric. And by the way, I want to say one other thing. There's a demand question as to how fast we move to electrification. It's very much worth noting that we've got 2 sort of forcing functions on this. One is how quickly we can get consumers, provide consumers with choices that lead to them making the decision to move to electric vehicles. And then we have policy on the other side. And it's important to note this as I'm sitting here in DC. And most countries around the world, most developed countries, had made commitments for 100% of their new vehicles to be electric between 2035 and 2040. Most are in the 2035 timeframe. In the United States, California Air Resource Board has committed to 2035. And a few states that have also followed that CARB standard are also there. I call that out because that's not that far away. So in about 10 years, in the state of California, you will not be able to buy a car with an engine in it. And I think we sometimes miss that there's this policy forcing function along with the need for us to create products that customers find interesting and compelling, that we're going to blink and it'll be here. And what that will represent in terms of societal shifts, what it's going to, around things like smog and local air quality is going to be remarkable. But we are at, like, the inflection point that we're living in is, it's really cool. It's like we're right at the beginning of this big shift where our whole global economy is going to be moving off of fossil fuels. And to be able to witness that, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, it seems remarkable to me that we are living in a history book. You can imagine there's going to be a whole chapter written about this moment that we're all in. And the fact that in addition to moving off of fossil fuels, we're also seeing the birth of artificial intelligence and its impact on society at the same time is just, I mean, how lucky are we?
RJ Scaringe, thank you very, very much.